Alright, welcome back. I have golden open acrylics here in Payne's Gray and transparent red iron oxide and white, titanium white. I like golden open to work with, but it's definitely not a necessity. I just have a lot of open paints right now and very little regular acrylics, so this is my choice. I sometimes use black with transparent red iron oxide. They should come up with a shorter name for this paint. Anyways, I'm almost out of black, so so I'm gonna try and save some of it for a later stage. And in the meantime, I think Payne's Gray is gonna be fine. The golden Payne's Gray is, it's not too blue, but it's bluer than some Payne's Grays that I've used in the past, so let's see. I had a face in mind. I actually have a partial sketch for my sketchbook, but it's outside of the camera view, so I will show it in a little bit. I will put it in the blog so you can download it if you want it. I can see a little bit of a face already. I think last project I actually tried to avoid defaulting to a portrait. And with this project, not so much. I actually find it easier sometimes to kind of tell myself, okay, it's going to be a simple portrait, and it allows me to focus more on, experimenting with certain textures. And last time that wasn't so much of an issue. So this is something, if you relate to this, then that might be an option for you. I get very overwhelmed if I have to do more than one thing out of my comfort zone. Okay, so now I have this one thing where my panel is covered with this. It's a beautiful texture, but it's quite obvious, and it's, it affects your brush and the way you apply paint. So for me, it's quite a bit to deal with already, and then I find it easier to paint what I consider to be a simple looking portrait. Portrait being a very broad term, just a random abstracted face. So my palette is a two-color palette. It's very similar to some of the stuff that I used before, and I made a couple of videos on mixing it. It's a warmer color and it's a colder color, and it's very simple. You can just create a range of temperatures, and then with white create a range of values in those different temperatures. So by temperature, in general, we mean, going towards the red is warmer, going towards the blue is colder. You can replace the Payne's Gray with a black and you would still go towards the blue. Yeah, when you speak in those terms. Payne's Gray is a mix of black and ultramarine blue. So depending on the brand you use, it can be bluer or it can be more neutral. And if you don't have it, obviously it's quite easy to mix. But I think it's a very convenient mix to have, especially for these practice sessions where I don't really feel like working with a blue, yellow, and red palette, and you really just want to make it easy on yourself. I like these two together. And of course, when you use these colors, the step to a Zorn palette, for instance, where you use black, yellow ochre, and a red, is not so big, because the only thing you're adding is a yellow, and that's the only thing that's missing here. Okay, you can't really go towards any more yellowish tones. So here is Carbon Black. Carbon Black by Golden is an opaque black. It has a very high tinting strength. I'm gonna use it in the darker areas because I don't want to add Payne's Gray on its own there, because I find it a little bit too blue. The other color I like using in conjunction with Payne's Gray, especially in practicing but also in underpaintings, it's a very good combination, is Burnt Umber. We have Burnt Umber and Payne's Gray. You're pretty much stuck, if you will, in the muted colors. There is no way you can get colors that are even remotely bright, vivid, sparkly, whatever. So it's very easy, especially for portraits. And the only thing you have to focus on is a slight shift in color temperature and then getting the correct values. And another combination is, of course, the one that I use a lot if you follow any of my classes, especially in Let's Face It. And I have a mixing video of it on this channel as well, is Burnt Sienna and Vitala Blue, which is a little bit more exciting palette than this one. Oh, I think I even used it. Didn't I use it in the previous Creative Experiments video? I think I did. Or at least partially. I'm gonna have to look that up. I'm trying to work a little bit according to the sketch I made. And try and put that hand in. Again, you can download the sketch. The link is in the YouTube description. Let me put it in camera view. Here it is. And this whole thing really, for me, is an experiment in how my paint that I know very well behaves under different circumstances. So in this case, a ton of texture that, you know, some of it is really, it absorbs a little bit, partially because it's textural, but also because it's fabric, right? So whenever you change these conditions, the way that your materials behave is very different, as some people like that. Some people like working with that during their projects. They're actually finished projects, if you know what I mean. I don't. I don't like unpredictability, and so I'm very much into, okay, let's try this on something that we can potentially throw in the garbage or otherwise ignore or destroy if we're not happy with it. We're all different people, and I think we all need to try to find something that works for us. And don't get discouraged when you see people, especially people you appreciate, maybe admire, you see them working in a specific way, and then it can happen that you feel like you need to work in that specific way. I felt that way before as well. You know, you want to copy what the people that you admire do, and it may not work for you. That doesn't mean that you can't get the same results, okay? There's always more than one way to achieve a certain result. So I put in that hand. I'm gonna try and get the background filled in a little bit here. I have some water. The one advantage that Golden Open has, well, it's an advantage and a disadvantage. I will explain why. It reactivates when you put water on it, or when you put the open thinner on it, and even when you put paint, wet paint on it. If it's not cured, you can reactivate it. And they did a couple of tests on the Golden website where they showed you a pile of paint that's been sitting there for 3 or 4 days or whatever, and they put some drops of thinner and mix it well, and the paint basically becomes workable again. This also means that it becomes workable on your surface, and I've actually been in situations where I brushed over areas that I thought were dry but weren't cured, and you reactivate the underlying paint layer and sometimes pick it up and pick it off the surface, and you end up with a hole in your paint basically. So it's one of those characteristics that you need to learn how to work with when you work with Golden Open. And when you do, it can be a very interesting paint to work with. But it sits somewhere in between regular acrylic paint and some people say oil paint, although I find it very difficult to compare an oil-based medium with acrylic paint. Honestly, it works so very differently. When you put wet oil paint into wet oil paint, you get wet oil paint. You know, it doesn't suddenly reactivate itself or or come off your surface. So it's entirely different, and this is something that you need to learn to work with Golden Open. I think normal thickness layers take about 3 days to cure, 3-4 days, something like that. But on this very textural surface, it's quite easy to blend, as you can see here, the different layers of paint. And I think on a textural surface you can get away a little bit more with paint behaving strangely. I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit on that white spot on the head, where I like it. I actually looked at my camera screen. I have a camera over my working table, and you can see a small version of your artwork on the display of my camera, which is very helpful. I think I said this a million times before, but it's a really clever way to assess the current stage of your artwork by literally zooming out. Yeah, so you can walk away, but we live in modern times, so you can also take a photo with your phone, look at it on a smaller screen. Okay. So what I like very much was the very blown out highlight on the head, but I don't want to leave any gesso on there. Yeah, it's gesso has a different finish, right? It has a very matte finish. I always prefer, if I want to keep parts of my painting acrylic paint white, I would prefer to replace that gesso with titanium white. Okay, I feel like paint from a tube has a stronger paint layer, basically, than gesso. Gesso can be a little brittle. It's just I don't think it's necessarily destructive for your work if you leave parts of your gesso open as long as you varnish, but maybe it's just a feeling that I need to touch everything with paint. So I'm first going to work on this hand a little bit. I'm not really sure how I want to do this in terms of composition. I think it's quite busy at this point with, you have that texture all around and then these white areas. It's a little bit distracting. Get a bit of a shadow in there, maybe. You can just use water. Like I said, I have some mediums. Golden Open has a couple of mediums that are, open, so you don't reduce the open time of your paint. But this stuff is compatible with anything that is acrylic, so you can even use regular mediums. But normally, especially in practice works, I just use a little bit of water. The paint itself, by the way, is quite thin. The consistency, I would not, they call it heavy body, but I wouldn't call it that. It has a thinner consistency. Yeah, I'm not even, not sure if I'm happy with this, but I'm also not inclined to go back and change it. I always find it difficult to choose between what I find interesting compositionally and what I think is the correct way that light would behave. Right? One is a very realist way, a realist approach, and the other is more based on what I like to look at. So I struggle with that a little bit sometimes, making choices between the two. I am mixing a couple of lighter tones because I want, like I said before, to cover that area. I want to work on that area on the forehead and create that highlight, that lighter area. I'm going to build it from a darker value to the lightest value. And this is a mid-tone. It's quite a light mid-tone, as I'm seeing it now. If you mix it on your palette, you think it's quite dark, but the whole painting is dark itself. So I try to put a little bit more saturation in my midtones. In some areas, midtones tend to be a little bit more saturated. It can create more of an interesting transition from shadow to highlight. On the edge of the head, I work that midtone in because it's the head, in the case of not having hair, is a round shape, and a round shape has a soft edge. So the highlight is sitting a little bit towards the front. Yeah. Try and create a little bit of diversity in the shape so it doesn't look like a sphere, like a marble, right? So here is a warmer highlight. If you have trouble over blending stuff, you keep that brush all the way to the end of your handle, and sometimes I put it on, I lean it on my fingers and I roll it around. Yeah, I don't even hold it. Like this. You get more unpredictable strokes. I have my substrate on a table. Yes, I'm working horizontally, just so you know. Maybe indicate an ear there. A little bit on the brow bone. And then the absolute lightest highlight that I'm gonna make a little bit colder. And this is how you stack the warmer and the colder tones. You don't have to do it like this. You can change it around. You can make my warmer tones cold and my colder tones warm. Creates a different mood. But make sure you have some diversity. Yeah, otherwise it's gonna look like a monochrome painting or a monochrome area. I want to keep those lightest lights for the top of the head only. So I'm not moving any of the highlights down to the face. It's a little bit tilted downwards, I think, the face, so it makes absolutely no sense for any highlights to be below the eyes. I'm just gonna add some darker paint, add some water, fill in some of those gaps in the gauze. When you make that darker, you add more focus on the face. And it's not very visible on camera, but that texture is actually catching a lot of light. So I'm gonna tone that down a little bit. I really like what that gauze is doing in terms of texture in the face. I really like it. It's almost like there was hair there once, flowing down. It's a bit of a decayed look. Sometimes you put texture on and it doesn't, you think to yourself, oh, this doesn't really add anything. Sometimes it feels like I add texture for the sake of texture. Yeah. So working like this, experimenting like this, can teach you and tell you how this stuff interacts. And it's important, I think, for me to make a ton of mistakes and realize that you don't always need to add texture to make things interesting. But when you do, it adds something to the structure of your painting. And I hope you enjoyed this a little bit longer than I expected experiment. I have a sale coming up because it's going to be my birthday on Monday, so keep an eye out for that. I will announce it on my newsletter, so if you haven't subscribed yet, there is a link in the description and in the pinned comments. And let me know what you think, if you have any ideas for the next video, and I will talk to you in the comments. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you again soon. Bye bye.